And today I think it's very important for us to discuss agents of socialization, because these agents of socialization all go into making us into the people that we are today. And this process of socialization does not stop. From the day that we're born until the day that we die, we are being socialized and then re-socialized and then re-socialized over and over again. And depending on where we live, where we move, how we interact, we are constantly in the process of socialization, because society has to function. And it has to function based on norms. It has to function based on values, and it has to be, everything that goes into making society whole and fashionable. Even beliefs and values that we adopt all have to fit into the larger society in order for society to continue to work. And so today we're going to have a topic, a discussion topic called Agents of Socialization. And just to give you an idea, the agents of socialization basically are available for us to help us function, and to help us to be able to maneuver in our social world, our surroundings. And this process basically occurs as we learn to use the objects of our society's material culture. In other words, we begin to formulate our belief system, values, and norms based on non-material culture. That means culture that you cannot touch, or that you may not be able to see with your eyes. However, you may be unconscious of them. But once you become a student of sociology or even psychology or social psychology, your eyes open and you begin to see the material and the non-material culture that we live in, or society that we live in. And so we learn how to interact with various agents of socialization. And those agents include our peer groups, our families, our religious institution, our medical institutions, our media. It includes everything that we touch in our life, school system. It also interacts with the basics of the workplace, religion, government systems, mass media. All of these are agents of society. When we talk about agents, we usually think of them sometime in a negative fashion, because we usually think of agents as being someone who is maybe a secret service agent, or someone who is stealing private or stealing classified information. We think of FBI agents, CIA agents, foreign agents. But today, these agents that we're talking about, they form and they function almost the same way as these other agents, the FBI, CIA, and other agents that may be in your culture or in your country. And so these agents have a job. And beginning with our first group of agents, we're going to talk about the social groups. And the social groups introduce the beliefs and values of society. So we look at social groups based on experiences, families, peer groups. They help teach us communication expectations. They reinforce or they enforce norms, and they also sanction, as we talked about, norms and abnorms and deviance. And we learn to use our material culture in these areas that help introduce beliefs and values of our society. And the first agent of socialization that we're going to talk about today is the family. Now, many of us are not necessarily aware of the importance of the family. And so we have a tendency to look at our families as just a group of people that we grow up with, our family being mothers and fathers, our siblings, grandparents, extended families, step parents, step sisters and brothers, any person that is considered to be kin or have some relation with us biologically or just by way of environment. They all teach us what we need to know. They teach us how to use objects or how to maneuver through all of the various material things that we see in our way as we grow up. Such as our clothes, our computers, eating utensils like spoons and forks and dishes, books, Bibles. They help us with gender identity, trucks and doll babies and doll houses and BB guns. And so this becomes very important. And so we look at these, the family, and we don't really understand the importance of the family preparing us for our relationship with society. And so if you even look at your own experience, socialization teaches us about many different objects and ideas. However, the family does not function by itself. It do have co-agents. And so these co-agents oftentimes help us with our children. You got babysitters, you got daycare centers, you have babysitters, you have friends and family that come in and help us with our children. And even sometimes strangers can play a role in helping us to socialize our children. And so when we begin to look at this, we also have to look at it from a sociological perspective. Last time we talked about the sociological imagination, and we talked about it from looking at our individual issues and then expanding that into the greater society and seeing how our own personal individual issues might fit into the same issues that we see in the greater society. And so we can look at historically, we can look at how the family functions and has functioned in society. So, you know, when we were growing up, my mother basically took care of the home. Even though she worked, she raised all of her children. She worked, she fed us, she clothed us. My dad was there for a period of time, but the majority of our lives, it was our mom. And she did everything, but she couldn't do it by herself because she had to work as well as take care of the family. And so basically, you know, it was her job to teach us how to act and how not to act. So she handled the discipline. And when she wasn't there, we had older siblings who handled the discipline. And we may not have liked it, but it's the way of the family. And so they taught us how to behave. And so we can even look at how families change and the dynamics of families change. How at one point I remember having to go outside to get a switch off the tree and peel it back as a tool of discipline. Today, if you hit your children, even with your own hand, that's considered child abuse. And so society's changed. So we have to also look at the changes in society and the changes historically that have happened in the family and apply it to our present realities in the family dynamics of socialization. And so we have to have that sociological imagination, but we have to look at it historically. And so we're going to get in a little bit further into this. And another very interesting point, we also have to realize that we as sociologists look at race and social class, we look at religion, and we look at ethnicity, we look at roles in society, and all of these individual groups or individual topics, we look at them based in the family. In the family, we have to look at race. In the family, we look at social class. In the family, we look at religion. We look at society and how it plays a role in the family. And we also have to look at, for example, I'll give you an example. One of the things that I learned in my sociology class was that Poorer families socialize their children or raise their children differently than wealthy families. Discipline, for instance, poorer families have a tendency to be strict, be more disciplinarians, and they enforce obedience and they enforce conformity to societal ways. So they're constantly telling us to behave, don't do this, don't do that. You know that's not right. You know this is bad. And sometimes religion assists them in their disciplinary ways. When I was growing up, we heard a lot of, well, God don't like this and God don't like that. Well, that's religion assisting and socializing us into what is normal behavior, values and norms, belief systems. And so wealthy families have a tendency to emphasize judgment and creativity. So they teach their children how to be more judgmental, or judgmental from the perspective being able to be good judges of good character or personalities or situations or whatever. Their emphasis is judgment and creativity. And you can go to the National Opinion Research Center. These statistics were a part of their research in 2008, where they looked at poor families and looked at wealthy families. And they looked at how these families had a tendency to raise their children. And so wealthy families also have a tendency to be more education oriented, or they have a tendency to be more focused on whatever their job might be. They have a tendency to discipline their children based on their work ethic or based on the type of work that they do. Creative problem solving. They teach their children to be beneficial in their positions. They're constantly teaching their children. What are they doing? Preparing them to replace them even in the workplace. And in the poorer families where work is not necessarily something that is a learned skill or something that you have spent years learning how to do, oftentimes in the poor families, work is a necessity. So you take what you can get and you take what society will allow you to have. So we have a tendency to teach our children to be more obedient, to conform. In other words, to take what's given to them and stop complaining. Don't complain about this. My mom used to always say to us, eat your vegetables. You need to eat all of your food. Do you know there are children over in Africa or in this country or that country that are starving, and here you go, you have all this food and you don't want to eat it, or you're wasting it? How many people have heard their parents talk about wasting food? And so that is very important when we look at socialization and we look at the family. And so what this means for us is that children are effectively socialized and raised to take even the types of jobs that their parents already have. And so by doing this, we now have socialized our children to look and to function in a certain class system or a certain stratification. In other words, if you're poor, you're going to teach your children how to function in a poor community, in a poor society. From a poor mindset, even your sociological imagination, whether you know that's what you're using or not, you have a tendency to socialize your children from those perspectives. And so we also teach our children how to be boys and girls. We teach them how society looks at them as based on their race and, based on their class, So, it's very easy to look at the family and see how the family basically is a small society. If you really want to say it that way, the family is a small culture. It's a small social system. And it has a tendency to have a little bit of all of the other socializing agents within its parameters. And so we look at the family and we try to understand how important the family is. Another group that we're going to talk about, which has a tendency to give us our experience outside of the family, and that group is the what we would call peer groups. that is the group of people who are maybe similar to our age group or similar to our children's age groups and their social status, basically share the same interests of either us or our children, whoever is being socialized. And most of the time when we look at peer groups, the greater influence come at younger ages. So when I'm talking about peer groups, we can apply it to all peer groups that we have, whether we're older, younger, middle-aged, senior, elder. There's a peer group that we all fit into. But in this topic, we're going to kind of talk more about children or young people as they age and how socialization affects them. And so when we look at peer groups and we apply peer groups to the process of socialization, we can look at peers, and sometimes kids are more influenced by their peers even before they get into the educational system, because they play with them outside. They have a tendency to learn rules and regulations, whether it be through force. Sometimes, you know how you have those peers who are sometimes considered to be bullies, or we have those peer groups who are friendly, they're unfriendly. So they kind of teach us, give us a taste of the larger society and some of the roadblocks that we might run into as we age and as we interact and become more infused in our society. And so they teach us how to play games, even how to understand and begin to apply rules. A lot of times our kids, they play games like baseball, volleyball, football, basketball, hopscotch, all types of games, hide and seek. And so in these games, there are rules. And so this is how come when I grew up, we had to stay outside. Our parents, we came home from school, especially in the summertime when there was no school. Go outside and play. Go outside and get some fresh air. And we would stay out as long as we could until the sun went down, the street light came on. And so by that time we knew that it was time to go home. So even when we look at symbolisms in society, the material symbolisms in our culture, street lights, the clock, timing, we look at our atmosphere, and we, children know when the sun goes down, it's time to go in the house. And so that all of these things are constantly having an input in us framing how we're supposed to act in society. And so even as teenagers, as children grow up, the peer process of socialization doesn't stop. It continues. And sometimes it could be even more intense depending on your environment and depending on how important your peers become to you. And sometimes when we become teenagers, we're still dealing with those young children that we were dealing with when we were kindergarten age, 3, 4 years old, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, as teenagers. So we have a tendency to kind of look at them now as more than just peers, but even they become more family oriented to us. And so peers also give us a taste of what it means to have a individuality or a separate identity from that of our family, or we become more independent. We learn to be independent. We learn to make decisions and to think for ourselves, and we learn to be good judges of character. Maybe not perfect, but we know who we want to deal with and who we don't want to deal with. We know, by the time we're teenagers and dealing with peers, we know which peers are good for us and have good influence in our lives and which ones do not. And so we have a tendency to become better judges of character. And so our peer groups have a tendency to be the first major socializing experiences that we deal with apart from our families. And so the next group that we look at when we look at agents of socialization is institutional agents. And so when we look at institutional agents, we begin to look at the systems that we become a part of or that we partake in as we leave the family, as we go out into the larger society. And one of the first agents that touches our lives is the school system or education system. And so these type of systems, these institutional agents, the first two groups we looked at, the family and peers, those are social groups or social agents. And so now we're looking at institutional agents. These institutions are beyond our control. Family is beyond our control. Peers are beyond our control because we're born into our family. But we also can be adopted. We can have a tendency to grow up outside of our family. But when you talk about institutional agents, if your family and your peers are not as influential in your life as they are in others, there's one group that will be very influential in your life, and that's the institutional agents. And so let's talk about one of those agents, which would be the school system. And so these agencies also have a tendency to inform our institutions. They inform our socialization. So they are institutions such as school system, workplace, the government. They all help us to understand and to maneuver and navigate through the systems. And so these institutions, like the media, they also influence us in a greater way in our socialization. And they also have a tendency to influence our norms and expectations of the larger society. And so the school system, there's the school system, I'm including the school system and family and peers. In our next video, we will deal more with the remaining institutions, such as the workplace, the governmental systems, and the media. We'll deal with those in another video by themselves. But this last group for this video is going to be the school system. And so we all know how long we spend in school. Children are in school sometimes from 8:30 to 3:30. So you're spending at least 7 hours a day in school. And out of the year, there's got to be, I mean, think about it. In the summertime, you get what? Maybe 90 days, 3 months in some places in America. You know, usually kids are out of school from maybe, let's say, May to August, and some from June to September. And so there is a large chunk of our lives spent in education. And so this is very, 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 very important to understand, because the school system has so much influence on our children. It's not just about going to school and reading and math, science, and doing subjects and having lunch and playing and learning how to interact with other children. The school system basically is a manifestation of how the whole or the greater socializing institutions function. The schools have two ways in which they function in society. They have a tendency to have a manifest function and a latent function. A manifest function is what you can see. They do when we talk about them teaching math and science and reading and subjects and things like that. But then there's a latent function where the school has a tendency to teach our children teamwork, how to follow a schedule, how to use textbooks, how they're supposed to behave. By having these latent functions, we have a tendency to not necessarily pay attention to the latent functions, and we have a tendency to have a greater expectation for our school to teach these more manifested functions like math and science and reading and writing and English and history and all of that. And so the classroom basically itself becomes a ritual. And most people don't realize that. The children are dealing with rituals. They're learning how to become basically robotic. They get up every morning And this, many of you, some of you might have different ways that you deal with your children when they're up, but this is basically the platform. They get up at a certain time. They get themselves dressed and washed and brush their teeth. They eat breakfast. And then they do other little things around the house, maybe talk to their parents, or their parents talk to them, or they might catch up on some homework that they didn't get done the night before. And then they have a tendency to go to school. How they get there becomes a ritual, whether they are part of a bus system, whether they walk to school, or whether their parents take them to school. They are going, it's a ritual. They get to school and the bell rings, and so then they go into the classroom, and some children are in one classroom all day. Some children, the bell rings and they go into the next classroom. The bell rings, they go into the next classroom. The bell rings, they go to lunch. The bell rings, they have recess. The bell rings and they go to their next class. So there is a ritual being instilled in the children, and so they become very robotic. Even though you're not sensing this this struggle against the rituals, they have a tendency to kind of flow with it, you know. And so society has these rituals, and they serve as role models. Also, the schools, the teachers, and the leaders, they serve as role model leaders. They reinforce what society expects from these children. And so we describe, as sociologists and as students of sociology, we also look at a hidden curriculum, which basically is informal teachings done by the school system. And when we look at this, we think of Robert Merton. And Robert Merton proposed that social institutions such as education and schools have functions that are both manifest and latent. The manifest functions are the ones that society intends those institutions to have. The latent functions are the ones that are not intended, but which come about regardless, just because they are part of the system. And so how these latent functions, one of the latent functions is to provide daycare for parents. The parents go to work. Another is to provide students with the opportunity to socialize with their peers at the higher grades, to find potential romantic partners. Marx scholar, or Marxism argues that schools socialize students to feel that our current class structure is legitimate and inevitable. These are functions that are not the real purpose of school, but which schools nonetheless fulfill. So in other words, we are looking at the school system today beyond the normal idea of what schools does. And so accordingly, we understand that, when we look at the school systems, we have to also understand how important they are in the lives of our children. And even today, when we look in the news and we see teachers fighting students, or teachers having improper relationship with students, that's because these are latent functions that are happening in the school system apart from educating our children. Like we talked about, children are learning how to find partners. And sometimes if you are not properly socialized, if there's an area in your life where you were improperly socialized, and you may do something improper, such as teachers sleeping with young children. Or we might find teachers making improper decisions about disciplining children. And so we have to deal with all of this when we talk about the school system and its socializing agency. And so so now we understand about the functional and the latent, the manifest and the latent functions of the school system. And so there's unintended consequences for school systems that, just because it's a system and just because children participate in it, there are consequences that are beyond the control of the school system, because they just happen because they are a part of the institutionalization of our children. And so we always think, oh wow, I would never institutionalize my children. Institutions are for people who are mentally ill, or who do not have proper training, or they may be medically disabled or something like that. Or we think of prisoners, That's what we think of when we think of institutions. But all of the agents out here are institutional agents, especially those that we participate in as in the greater society when we look at the systems that function in society. And so we also understand that the school system has a tendency to teach our children intellectual and academic experiences. And so from there, they even learn how people function on jobs, because they see their teachers coming to work every day, their principals coming to work every day, and they have a tendency to look at them and see what they do. They know that children know that the people that are teaching them are parents, and so they have a tendency to associate. So, I'm looking at this teacher come to school every day. My mom leaves to go to work every day. How do I relate these things? So they're becoming good analysts. And so there are several latent functions of schools, including, like we talked about, finding romantic and marriage partners. Also, schools have the tendency to help us find a place in society, in social hierarchy, or the larger community, which is the school. And these latent functions include finding an interest in extracurricular activity that may not or may be a part of the school's agenda. You think about it. Your children participate in after-school programs and before school to participate in extracurricular or extra credit activities. And so there's all types of agendas or functions that the school system has in the lives of your children. And also they have a tendency, their peers have a tendency to also enhance these latent functions, because they're also going through these same types of latent and manifest functions, and they're being influenced through the school system in these areas. And so there's a lot of things that we learn in the school system that are very important to our child or our children or our families' ability to function properly in society. And so today we talked about the family, we talked about peer groups, which are considered to be the social groups. Families and peers, they are our social groups they're the social agents, or the social group agents of socialization. The school system, I included that in with the family and peers, because it's the next level from the peers to to the process of socialization of the child. And so family, peers, and then the school system. And so in our next video, we're going to discuss the final agents of socialization, which are still institutional. They are part of the institutional groups of socialization. And so these institutional agents, which we talked about the school system today, but then next time we're going to talk about the workplace, which is going to be very, very interesting. And we'll also talk about religion, government, and mass media. Because these are the agents that, as we move away from the school system, these agents have a tendency to they have a tendency to influence our lives, even while we're in school, while we're in our families, and while we're interacting with our peers, especially religion, and especially the media. And so religion and the media are two very important socializing agents. And matter of fact, we consider them, even in psychology and sociology, to be very strong agents of socialization, because they touch us throughout our lives. And most of us have built our characters, our personalities. We have developed our norms and our values and our belief systems based on the media, based on religion. Because the family, even the family historically, based on inheritance and based on practice, that even the family has a tendency to continue the process of socialization from religion, from the media, because the family has a tendency to regulate what we watch on TV. And that process even sometimes begins before we even begin to deal with peers and the school system. You know, nowadays, babies are born, and a lot of times they're raised right in front of the TV. Think of all of the access, media access that we have. We got cell phones, we got iPads, we got TV, we have the internet. And so we have all of these media avenues, or avenues for the media to help us raise our children. So we put on these little cute kid shows, and the media teaches, we use media to teach our children ABCs and colors and numbers and 1, 2, 3s and you know, just their shapes, how to eat, how to go to bathroom, potty training our children through the media. So if we can look at that, we can see, wow, the media has a strong pull on who we are becoming and who we have become today in society. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more in our next video. And hopefully these videos are helping you. And as I stated, we're not trying to give you the academic quote definition or information of socialization. We're trying to bring it home and make it give it to the everyday lay person who maybe have not taken a sociology class or even heard of sociology. And so I think it's important to bring this information to the masses, and to bring it at a level that people can understand it and apply it, and even begin to consciously recognize the process in their everyday life. And it might even help you to raise your children to be more intent when raising your children. We also are going to look at some of the institutions that re-socialize us, such as the prison system, such as the medical system. We know that these institutions have a tendency to have a strong influence on our lives, and sometimes their intent is not seen, but is felt, because they also have latent functions that are not necessarily always something that we consciously recognize or experience, but subconsciously we experience them. And so I want to thank you all for being here, and hopefully you will have a beautiful day, and that these topics can help you. And please leave a comment, please like and subscribe. And please ask any questions or provide any further insight that you feel can help the layperson understand sociology or socialization. If you want to have a discussion, please use the comment section, and we'll be glad to respond to any questions, any comments that you might have. And we thank you once again. And next week, like I said, or not next week, but our next video, because we're not trying to put these out by a certain time of the week or a certain time of the day or a certain time of the month. We're just trying to give them to you as we create them. And so our next video, as I said, we will continue to talk about the institutional groups for socialization, or the institutional agents of socialization. Thank you very much, and you have a great day.